The rabbit hole is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, health, tax, or financial advice. The program's participants are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from acting on the information contained within this program. All discussions and disclosures are part of the public record. We ask that listeners respect the privacy of the individuals participating or named in each episode. Thank you.
Welcome to the Rabbit Hole podcast.
Down the rabbit hole we go.
Welcome to the Rabbit Hole with your hosts Marty and Andie.
We begin in
5, 4, 3, 2.
Corporatocracy, a system or society in which corporations have economic, political, and often judicial control. The following episode is a real-life example, in our opinion.
I've seen a circular logic that's illogical. So it's this broken pattern of trying to get a resolution and trying to find an ultimate choice, decision, consequence, something in black and white, a straight line from right and wrong. And what I've seen is a system that it's achieved this ability to kind of avoid a right and wrong answer, an accountability, if you will.
Yeah, so I'm kind of obsessed with the concept of corporatocracy. I'll just read the definition again. I'm sure we'll have it at the top of the episode, but it basically means a system or society in which corporations have economic, political, and often judicial control. And I feel that very strongly in our situation. So what I'm really referring to is this system in Virginia that allows for things like new construction homes to be a self-regulating process that's basically investigated, heard, and decided by corporate entities, right? So if we start looking at contractors, they're not operating under themselves as individuals, they're operating as LLCs, right? So they are that 1% corporate entity light, let's say, right? Where they have this LLC and that protects them if they make a mistake or they kill somebody or something goes wrong during construction, right? So to say that they are then going to self-police in a system as designed by, I don't know who actually, but this DPOR system where you have contractors and you have a recovery fund, and that recovery fund is supposed to compensate consumers if there's something like what happened in our house. It's very limited. It used to be $50,000 and now it's 20. So it's that limited. You could retrieve $20,000 on a screw up by a contractor who's regulated by this board. That board doesn't take tax donations for that recovery fund. And I think that's kind of how they weasel their way in, is they say, hey, lower taxes for taxpayers. Let's self-police and create a fund that contractors pay into so that if anything goes wrong, it's a self-contained system. We can make everybody whole again, right? Well, that's not even close to whole, first of all. Second of all, if you're going to have executive powers, and this is an executive branch of the government, the last thing I want is corporate interests doing the judicial and the regulatory part of the process.
Right. I think that's the big thing that this is uncovering, because, and I've said this many times, but going through the process, you think of surely at some point they're going to connect the dots because this is so obvious and so egregious, and they never do. And it's because the system is not, I'll put it to you this way. If citizens were to elect someone to an office, you could say, and that was the main way that power was passed and managed, then there would be a clear line of accountability. But in this situation, that's not the case, because a public official really, other than donations from the corporate sphere, they're really not involved. That's why when we contact county officials, state officials, federal, we don't get any response. There's no action. There's no activity. There is a point to another firewall. And this Department of Regulations, what is it? I keep forgetting.
Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation.
Okay. So that organization is the perfect example to dissect as far as why the government can't outsource governing to the corporate interests. I used to defend this idea that you could shift some of the responsibility to industry in exchange for savings of tax dollars, because I wanted a small government. I thought that was the answer. And that's from growing up the way I did, and I'll talk about it at some point. I always kind of thought that the government would get involved and that would be a negative thing. So whatever you could do to extract that, I was all about it, right?
And this kind of scratches that itch, doesn't it? Because it gives you this pretense of, it's not really government. We're going to self-regulate as corporate people and entities and make sure that we don't have to tap the government to do the regulation. So it saves everyone, right? Saves consumers, saves the government the effort, and it should be self-regulating if it were operating in a way that made sense.
There's division that's going to occur organically, and there's division in society that's going to, let's say, be fostered. And I looked at a lot of things that say I was typically a Republican, not typically, I was a Republican-minded person from when I was 18 on. I looked at things and I would see certain things where it seemed like it wasn't beneficial to the little guy, and it really wasn't the idea of small government. It wasn't what I thought was right, but it was on my side. So I didn't support it, but I didn't oppose it. And that's the leverage, is this idea of like, well, if you're against business, you're against freedom. And if you want to regulate, then you just want to shut down the economy.
Right.
That's not it.
No.
I want to have responsibility and governance be the responsibility of the government. I don't want the responsibility and the authority to fall to private interest, to police private interest. That's not the idea.
No, and that's what happened during the Gilded Age, right? So that's kind of this cycle, this wheel that keeps turning, and it keeps popping up because we're not dealing with the core issues and we're not really taking responsibility as human beings. You can't have a self-regulating society when we all have a different opinion of what's right and what's wrong. That makes it really difficult. So the government definitely serves a purpose. You need to have someone regulating because you can't rely on everyone to agree morally, right? So that's fine. I understand the need. The issue comes in when it's corporate interests, because now it's an extra layer, right? Like the government, we all can say, oh, politicians are corrupt. We all dislike the government and the way it's running. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Obviously, we're having problems. We're in like how many world wars, right? So you look to corporations and you go, well, they're making money, they're functioning, they're self-regulating their employees. Well, how well are they self-regulating their employees? You know, we've had to create labor laws because they get crazy. You have people sitting on boards right now at DPOR, just to bring it back to DPOR, and it's contractors who are LLCs themselves sitting on boards deciding what the penalties are going to be for contractors who break the laws that are in place. And just like we talked about in the last few episodes, those laws change really quick because DPOR exists. So it's a regulatory board. They can have an aside meeting. They don't need to pass a bill. They don't need to go through the state Senate. They can just change the regulations because it's the Virginia code. They have their own process. If they notice that there is a problematic area pops up and there's a spike in activity, let's say, you can just change the regulation to bring that spike down. You can say, instead of us not allowing unlicensed subcontractors in any amount over $5,000, we'll up it to 10. Well, if we're still spiking, let's make it 20. So then what are you actually regulating at that point?
Anybody normal operates under the assumption that there is, of course, like you get to the point and you say, well, of course, they're not going to let it go off the rails past a point. Of course, they're going to find a way back to logic and common sense. I had those kind of assumptions coming into it. So I operated with some good faith that I was purchasing a home in Virginia, that the HOA for the neighborhood, that they would have some kind of vested interest.
I think you have to say HOA. Everyone always gets offended
HOA.
When I say HOA. I don't know why,
HOA.
but everyone's like, oh, you mean the HOA.
HOA, sorry.
We say HOA up north. I don't know why, but here they say HOA.
Yeah, so HOA. That I kind of thought that there would be some concern there. I thought that the county would certainly want people to do business the right way. I thought that the state, certainly Virginia, would be all over this.
But this doesn't matter to the state, right? And this brings us back to DPOR. So if you're sitting on the board and you're like, I'm a contractor, I want to sit on the board. I want everyone to look at me and say, this is the voice of wisdom. Here I am. Here's the accolades. I've ascended in my profession to the point where I'm now a trusted board member. And I'm sitting there and I hear a case from someone who's doing something that I know I've done on my job sites a million times. And I don't really consider it a big deal. Am I going to turn around then and be a hypocrite and tell my boy, you know what? It's not okay. In most cases it is. I do it, but I'm going to regulate you. No, of course not. Of course not. The reason I also think it's the most impotent board in existence in Virginia is because look at the fines. The fines are $1,600 here, $1,500 there. I think the max is $2,400, something stupid.
It's changed. They've lowered the threshold as they've gone.
Well, I don't even know, but that's low in my opinion.
Sure.
I mean, my ceiling collapsed. If that collapsed on one of my kids, God forbid, and they died and their neck snapped, let's say, God forbid, really gory visual there, $1,500, is that going to cover it? Absolutely not. And that's the extent of their ability to do fines. So just to let y'all know, I'm not making this up. I'm going to go right from their website, right? If you go to their About Us page in their What We Do section, they are an executive branch agency that oversees 18 regulatory boards and programs. And they have about 200 employees. So those employees are paid by tax dollars, but their operating expenses are in part covered by this contractor fund. And they also regulate about 300,000 individuals. Now that can be contractors. It can also be, beauty salons. There's a couple different sections that they oversee, but all of these people they're regulating touch your everyday life. Even in, let's talk about that hair appointment I had. That one time I was trying to straighten my hair because I have really curly hair. I went and I did one of those, I think it was like a Brazilian hair straightening treatment.
It was expensive.
It was very expensive and I had no idea. But anyway, I got this done and I was coughing the whole time and it was really unpleasant. And 2 days later, my entire scalp lifted and peeled off of my head from this chemical that they used. And lo and behold, it was full of formaldehyde. They didn't give me a mask. They didn't give me any kind of protection. And it created this whole industry of which I was a part because I created a soap company based off of some of this knowledge because people were affected by this formaldehyde that can kill you. Obviously, you're inhaling it when you do this beauty treatment and there were no regulations in place to protect you. So here's DPOR years later down the road, not saying they're responsible for the treatment, but this is the type of thing they're in place to prevent.
Yeah, I think when regulations become synonymous, because I'm trying to think about this from like a long-term kind of Republican-minded guy. And regulations are synonymous with taxes and cost. And you think it's going to make things harder to do and it's going to be unnecessary burden on business. And the truth is, if you have clear rules that are available and easily accessible to the public, then if there's something that becomes so much of a burden that you can't do it and it's harmful to the public, they can make the change and they can make a decision. But if not, and you just hide this information or make it very difficult to access, then I have to be concerned about your ability to make decisions and form policy.
Well, also, I mean, how low can you set the bar? Again, going back to that DPOR website, right? If you look at their What We Do section, I'm going to read it to you exactly because I read this and I was like, this can't be true. But I'm going to read it to you exactly as it is. And it states, DPOR issues professional credentials, licenses, certificates, or registrations in the least intrusive, least burdensome, and most efficient way. Our goal is to ensure the minimum competency necessary to practice without harming the public. And it goes on. Minimum without harming the public? that's the regulatory board, I'm a little concerned.
Well, I do remember we had this one conversation. So mind you, this isn't to recap our story because this goes way beyond us. But when you're talking about you contract for one grade of material, they give you a lower. I think 3 fires, maybe 4 we've got. You've got a flood, you've got a mold remediation, you've got a ceiling that collapses in, and it goes on and on and on. And I remember when we were getting ready for our hearing that the emphasis, and I'm not going to name the name because I'm not sure on it, I can cover that later, but somebody at that organization, at the DPOR office, they were so concerned because it had to do with the license of the builder. They never, not once do I remember anybody saying, we're really concerned about a homeowner who has all these things happen to them that you have. Not once. What they were concerned for was the integrity and license of that builder. To the point where a tremendous amount of data that we have from our FOIA, from the investigation, never even made its way to the hearing for consideration.
Not even a photo from us. They did allow the builder to submit some photoshopped pictures from a professional photo shoot that was done before everything caved in. But, that was considered evidence, right? Not the evidence.
That was tolerable. So I'm going to give you a think about it like a parallel, and you say that's extreme.
But remember the concept before you even describe it, corporatocracy. I want us to keep that in mind today.
Okay. So consider the prison system. I thought about this. I'm like, imagine if the parole board was decided by prisoners. You'd say, well, that's an absurd example because they're criminals and they've done things wrong and they're in jail, but they're in that same pool. And you could say, well, obviously you need a third party to be impartial because prisoners, they're all prisoners together. So maybe they have some common interests that go beyond the public, perhaps, right? So all you need to do is simply say, what's the budget? What's the cost? Bring it to the people. Say it's going to cost about this much money to have regulation that isn't tied to the industry, that is overseeing the industry. What's the cost of that? Because I can tell you the cost of having your homeowner insurance go up. Yep. I can tell you the cost when your homeowner says, well, it's workmanship, so you're not covered. The individual, the consumer/citizen is liable and the corporation is not.
Right. Well, I mean, even going through our investigative notes on our DPOR file, the investigator actually wrote that she had spoken to our contractor, and the contractor stated that our purchase contract, says in it somewhere that the certificate of occupancy is proof that all building codes were followed and all of the statutes were correct. Everything done in our home was correct. Just because it says that line in the contract, even though on the certificate of occupancy, the building department states that it's not at all guarantee that the building code was followed or that all things are correct. It's just a guarantee that it's minimally livable, and I mean, I can make a cardboard box minimally livable with some duct tape. So they don't guarantee anything at the building department. But because my contractor said that as part of the interview, DPOR said, well, then gospel must be true.
Right.
So they didn't pursue that charge because my contractor said, well, I said in the contract XYZ, so therefore XYZ is now true. And that was it. That was how our case was decided. If that's not corporatocracy, I don't know what is. So that was really infuriating to me because they didn't even bother to look. Now, meanwhile, this is also the same organization who listed a company as my contractor who didn't even work on my home.
Well, that was because that's what was told to them by the builder.
Right. Corporatocracy.
So it's okay.
It's okay because it's corporatocracy, right? And if he did it by accident and they got confused and they didn't check it, it's okay because corporatocracy, because it wasn't intentional and nothing is regulated by DPOR unless it's intentional.
Well, yeah. So that's interesting. So you can lie and there really isn't a serious consequence for lying.
Disclaimer, in our opinion, based on our experience, as we see it, as we understand it. Continue, please.
Sure. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, you can, we've got it. We've got, and that's the thing that is kind of fuels you. You're like, well, here's a lie, here's a lie, here's a lie, here's a new lie. Well,
in our opinion.
or let's just say something that conflicts with the truth.
In my opinion, what I've read in black and white
All right.
seems to be a lie.
Yeah. And
if it's compared to the truth as I see it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's wild. And so that was the other thing, that there was a change that basically, we had kind of joked about this a little bit before about thought crimes, but that's kind of becoming policy. So if the consumer citizen thinks something, then the authority can decide that's the wrong thing to think and imply intent. They can do the same thing in a defensive mechanism with contractors.
Right. And you can read that too. So if you say, okay, I need to recover from a contractor and DPOR was unsuccessful in their case, like it was in my case, you can still access a transaction recovery fund and get $20,000, but it's really specific and it provides relief. This is from their website, to eligible consumers who have incurred losses through the improper or dishonest conduct of a licensed residential contractor. The recovery fund is supported entirely by assessments paid by licensed contractors, not by any tax revenues. Filing a claim does not guarantee payment. So this is the same organization who states they have no power to assert compliance. They can't force a contractor to fix anything, but there's this recovery fund, right? So that's great. It provides relief, but you have to let me get to the judgment page and I'll tell you what you have to prove to get it. Improper or dishonest conduct includes only the wrongful taking or conversion of money, property, or other things of value, which involves fraud, material misrepresentation, or conduct constituting gross negligence, continued incompetence, or intentional violation of the Uniform Statewide Building Code. Do I think, in my opinion, that we proved that in our case? I mean, had the evidence actually been read? Of course. But if you don't have it in writing that they not only were dishonest, but intended to be dishonest, they're going to say you haven't proven your case.
Right. If you
in
can't
our opinion, based on our experience from what we've seen.
So it becomes intention. And
right.
So if I'm dishonest and you don't have me stating on the record in writing, and even if I stated it and said I'm lying deliberately, then maybe I meant something different. Maybe I didn't mean it that way. It made me think too, was in talking to one of the authorities at this regulatory body, they made it clear. We said, well, if somebody's not licensed and they do something the wrong way, their position was, well, we can't do anything about it. Well, if somebody is licensed and uses that same unlicensed labor in the wrong way, you can do something about it. But in that instance, you didn't as well. And so one of the other things, so you think to yourself, this is this circular game.
Right.
And in conjunction with that, you say, well, here's a contractor that's unlicensed doing something, even though we didn't have a contract with them, it was through a licensed contractor. It's criminal on the books. It's a misdemeanor. But the authorities can choose whether or not they want to pursue that. And from you say, well, you could call the cops. The cops aren't going to get involved. I mean, maybe they would. I was told that maybe they would.
I mean,
maybe
they
wouldn't.
could do the investigation, but I mean, are you going to go to the cops when you have a regulatory board in place, right? And you could find these people and get a resolution. Why would you go to the cops over something that can be easily regulated with either monetary damages or fines or some restriction on their license, even if it's temporary? It doesn't make sense to push it onto the cops. It's ridiculous.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that's the position that it puts you in.
Right. Oh, for sure. For sure. But that's DPOR doing that.
And
I think that they do that to have plausible deniability, in my opinion. But this is the corporatocracy and why I've come to believe that all things can be worked out, right? I mean, if you look at us, I was probably about as pagan and liberal as could be when we met. And you've always been Republican. And we work it out somehow, right? So you can figure things out.
Like pagan or Republican.
I mean, I was pretty pagan.
Yeah. No,
okay. And like I came around, I became Christian. I did become more conservative in my values, but I've always kind of leaned anarchist. I think it's broken. I'm more of the opinion, let's flip tables and break it down and start over, because I don't think you can fix something this seedy with the laws in place that exist right now. And not saying that I literally want to do that. I'm not an extremist. I'm just saying, to me, if something is broken, you have to start from scratch, right? And that's the problem that I have with this system in place as is. I'm pretty disgusted by people who claim Christianity, but can't figure out how to do the right thing when given the opportunity. That's gross to me. When I'm dealing with a government that pushes off responsibility so that you're doubly victimized, once by the issue that took place, and then again by the government because they're so annoyed that you have taken time out of their schedule to discuss what went wrong, even though it's their job. How dare you? That's gross to me. So
there's definitely that air of condescension.
Yeah.
It's like,
completely.
it's a very condescending.
Completely. Yeah. And what I've been up to lately is trying to get this story out. I think that this extends not just from, the new construction point of view. I think that that's a big problem. But I think there are consumer laws in place that prevent justice, that don't protect the public, that are only in place to protect corporate interests. I think you can see that if you look at the vaccine, how that's handled, right? You can create a vaccine, it may cause damage, and consumers have no recourse. If they become ill, there is this limited fund that is such a wheel of nonsense corporatocracy that they probably won't be able to access the funds they need to make themselves well again. This extends to, the beauty industry. If there are knockoff products being sold and they go through Amazon, what's your recourse really? Are you going to try and sue that company in China that sold you a knockoff? You don't really have any recourse. These things go on all the time. Medical equipment, right? Medical equipment is another area that is highly corporatized, right? So you have no recourse if things go wrong. It's really written into every contract that consumers have no protection. And that's where we've been leaning for so long that I think we need to right the ship by bringing these things forward.
Yeah, I think that the way that this can happen is a couple things. It's assumptions and divisions. Assumptions that the right thing is going to happen, that your guy is going to do the right thing and they care about you and da-da-da. Well, don't assume, doesn't mean that they don't, doesn't mean that there aren't good people and good things and good ideas, but just don't assume and don't put blind faith. And secondly, this division. We're so divided politically, in terms of faith, in terms of so many areas. We just have to, I don't want to say live and let live, but to a certain extent, be an individual, protect the rights of the individual, care about the individual, care about justice for all.
Be good humans, period. That's it. And don't even worry about if you're Christian or not, good or evil. Be good humans. You can take each other into consideration. You can make sure that everyone is accounted for. When we first started this battle, rest assured, I didn't want to be starting a podcast about something like new home construction. I had my own life, What I did do was I came forward and I said, this happened. Can you please help us and correct this? That's what I did for months. That turned into years. That turned into ignored calls and a firewall. So here we are now, right? So now I've gone down this rabbit hole with him. I'm going down the rabbit hole with other contractors, and I'm going to keep doing this and exposing it everywhere I find it. I'm not going to stop at new home construction. I went to Wikipedia just to bring it back to the Gilded Age because I started watching that show. And it's an interesting show, but it's also infuriating for me because it's basically about how these really uber rich people are having this war about an opera house because there's new money and old money, and the new money wants to get into the old money opera house. So the wives are just battling it out, trying to destroy each other by making their friends show it. Stupid, right? It's so stupid. And it's just a stupid concept, right?
Did it happen in Virginia?
No, it happened in New York. It's in New York. It's like all the families who built, New York City. And I looked it up on Wikipedia and they were talking about the Gilded Age. And this is a quote that I kind of felt was fitting. So I'm going to just read it. I'm reading a lot today. I don't know why, but anyway. The quote from Wikipedia says, historian Howard Zinn argues that during the Gilded Age in the United States, The U.S. government was acting exactly as Karl Marx described capitalist states, pretending neutrality to maintain order, but serving the interests of the rich. And that says it all to me.
And that is the danger. That's the full circle that we're risking by playing this silly little game. If freedom and justice and integrity of the law is not upheld, another system will come in to take over.
And that's what's happened. And it's really just protecting the rich who are able to play these corporate games, create corporate shields, take 100% of the money from the little guy to build whatever it is they were supposed to build, deliver 80% of the product, walk away, have no liability because of all the liability shields, and drain the coffers of the little guy until they just go away broke and sell their house like we're having to do.
Well, it's funny because I remember that quote from, well, I'm paraphrasing George Carlin, but it was something about, there's this club, but you're not in it.
Oh, yeah.
And two things with that. One, you're probably not in it, even if you think you are, I assure you. And secondly, do you want to be in that club? I mean, really?
Right.
Do you want to be in a club where it's like, well, I can get away with this, so I'm going to do it. And it's gonna improve my status in this little clique. And it's going to give me it's not even a question of like status in terms of your economic status, because if you're able to do these kinds of things, you're probably fine financially. So you're just doing it for ego. So do you want to be in a club where you can take advantage and lie and deceive on a grand scale because it's profitable and you can wink and nod to the other guy that does it? Like, that doesn't seem like the pool I want to swim in, know? But I also would say this, if you think you're in the club, if you think, and you don't know, you're not in the club. And I'm telling you that a lot of this information, it's not just going to be us. A lot of this is coming out. And when somebody needs to be held accountable, the system is not going to be held accountable. The people who are actually really making decisions, they're not going to be held accountable. Somebody who thought they were in the club, they'll hold them accountable. But I'm telling you, if you're out in that space, somebody's going to pay.
Well, it's like the fire blanket theory that I came up with, right? So everything's getting hot now. All these people are seeing it. The temperature's going up. There's a lot of eyes on this. It's on fire, right? This is pretty obviously something that needs to be looked at. So what are they going to do? They're going to use whoever's newest in the club as a fire blanket, just face plant them right on the fire and be like, you take the heat, right? So that's what's going to happen. They're not going to take the heat at DPOR. They're not going to take the heat at the insurance company and pay for this. They're just going to be like, dude, you made a mess and now everyone sees it. So face plant you right on the fire, right?
Yeah.
Metaphorically speaking. So that's all I expect is going to happen, if anything at all. And if it doesn't happen ever, that's fine too. I've been extending my reach. I've been going back into, contacting people that we knew way back when and really trying to get the story out in some sort of documentary style, because I'm not exactly a documentarian, but I can tell a story. So if that's where this leads, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And so we'll find our way. There's other things that we're working on that will help. We're going to help the industry with some accountability. We're going to help you because I know you're good guys and you just need a little help. So we're going to help you with that. We're working on several things. But one of the things I would say is along that way, we all look at, we look at the very top of the pyramid and we think that's where the change, not we, but people think that's maybe where the top is where the change comes from. And the people on the very bottom are kind of insequential. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you're doing better than somebody else. So just kind of keep quiet. That is the absolute wrong position to take. We should all, as individuals, as best we can, as imperfect as we are, be anchors for what's right in our community and not just smile and nod and pass it on to somebody else and just hope we're not the one that hit falls on. No, if we take a stand and we have a certain standard for ourselves, and then we encourage that to our circle of influence, it's going to improve the environment because change does not come from the top.
It doesn't. And two more things I'll add, right? So we decided to put our house on the market, and that decision came in part because during the course of our lawsuit, our builder decided to force entry in our home with a legal motion, right? So he files a legal motion, which means I then have to pay my attorney to answer that motion. I also have to pick up myself, all my kids, and all my pets and leave the home so that he can have unfettered access to my home while I'm not in it, which is, let me tell you, not a comfortable feeling. And I also have to pay my attorney his rate to sit there and wait for him to show up. So he selected a certain date. We had a couple of weeks in advance said, okay, this is the day. We opened the doors. We paid our attorney his rate for the hours that he was going to be there. And lo and behold, no call, no show. Probably $1,000 loss. If you guys go to the blog, I talk about it there too. It's got to be $1,000 to $2,000 out of pocket. I haven't gotten the bill yet, so I don't know the exact amount. And a loss of a day of work, right? Plus the inconvenience of having to walk around with my cat in a carrier. He hates it, and he's adorable. He doesn't deserve it, you know? So that's where we're at. We lost all this money. We're totally made uncomfortable. He no calls, no shows, but he feels real good about himself, I'm assuming, because why else would you file a motion and then not show up? It doesn't make any sense.
Because it's allowed.
Right.
And that's the lesson that over and over we've been having, like, I accept it now. This is what is allowed. And so I don't think we get justice per se, but I think if you want to maintain the illusion that you're trying to create, you can't phone it in to the level that you're phoning it in right now.
Right.
But that's okay, because if this is what it is, we'll just simply make it known. We'll create ways to course correct, and that's what'll happen.
Well, it's all public record now, right? That's the one thing that corporatocracy hasn't stopped yet. So we're going to keep saying it until they figure out that this is the light they don't want shown on what they're doing. The fact that he can basically use the legal system to create these motions that will drain our bank account and limit our access to justice. We're no longer in an equal footing at that contract table. So from one Christian to another, my friends, I would love to have you on the program. I would love to have this conversation right across the table from you. I will point you to Matthew 18, 15 through 18. Read those verses and then come on the show and we'll settle it. This doesn't need to go on the way that it has, and it doesn't need to be the horrible example of Christianity that it's become.
I think it's one thing when you use corporate protections to create a liability shield for yourself. It's not good, and we need reform there. But I think when you use Christianity to do it, that's especially egregious.
It is. And as Christians, yes, I can forgive you, but I can also hold you to account. That is biblical. And you have a duty to treat me with love and respect. And that's what we're called to do as Christians, to leave a gaping hole in my ceiling and allow my kids to sit in a house full of mold while you acknowledge my emails in private, but tell the world that you're unaware. That's not Christian.
Amen.
If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault, between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven.